Hey, what's up? It's Tati, and I'm back with another review of Dark Side of the Ring. This time, season 2, episode 2, part 2 of the Chris Benoit story. The episode was split into two episodes since there's a lot of information to give. I did do part 1 a little while back ago. I was a little hesitant about doing part 2 because when it comes to this story, I actually do relate to Nancy Benoit, and I kind of felt like it was a little traumatizing to talk about the experiences that she went through because I went through similar experiences as well with being in a domestic violence situation. Also, because of the way she died as well, Chris did strangle her, and that's what caused her death. And I was in that same situation too, where that person had strangled me, and I honestly thought that that was literally my last moments. Just thinking that I wasn't going to make it. So I kind of relate, thinking like how Nancy must have felt those last few moments before she had passed away. But you know what? It was a long time ago, and even though it is still traumatic to me, I still feel like this is a really important story, whether if you're a wrestling fan or just anybody who just took an interest to this story. If you know anybody who's in a situation like this, where they're with someone who is abusive, even if you feel like there's nothing you can do, there is always something that you can do to help that person out the situation. Because just like Nancy's family and friends, a lot of people knew that she was in an abusive situation and unfortunately did not do enough to keep her away from that. And had someone really took the time out to help her and get her away from that situation, she and Daniel might have been here still today. But either way, let's get into this review and go into the details of how the situation happened with Chris Benoit murdering his family and also committing suicide, and how that affected his family and the professional wrestling world. So we start this episode with Lieutenant Larry Alden, who was one of the officers that went to the Benoit's home for the wellness check when a person from WWE had called to have someone check to see what was wrong with Chris, since he did not come in for the pay-per-view that Sunday. Now, Larry often saw Chris Benoit at their local gym several times a week, so he knew where he lived, and he thought that something might have been off. When he went there, he did notice that there were two big dogs in the yard, and the neighbor next door, who often watches over the dogs, this took the dogs and brought them into the home, since the police seems to be, I guess, maybe a little afraid that the dogs might attack them. So when the neighbor brings the dogs inside, she comes out after a moment screaming, crying, saying that Daniel was dead. So the police went inside to see what was going on. The first thing they noticed was a foul odor in the home. And once they went upstairs to Daniel's room, they did see him dead on the bed. And also he had a Bible placed next to him. They go to another room and they found Nancy also dead with a Bible placed next to her, and they looked around to see what would have happened to Chris. And when they made their way to the basement where their home gym was, they did find Chris Benoit hanging in the gym as well. So they don't know exactly what's going on, but they do know here that there are three people in one family that are dead, and they're not sure how to piece the puzzles together, but they do call back to WWE and provide them with that information about their deaths. And with them not having that much information, they're obviously feeling some type of way because Chris works for them. They know Nancy, and also Daniel, who's just a little boy who ends up passing away. And from there, things just got much, much worse. So Chris Jericho, who's also narrating the show, did provide an interview as well. He was really close to Chris Benoit, and a representative from WWE did give him a call while he was on his way home from the gym, and that's how he ended up finding out what happened to Chris. The same day that Chris and his family were discovered to be deceased in the home, Nancy's sister, she went out because Nancy had recommended that she should take a day out for herself and pamper herself and go see a movie. And when she came out from the movie, she turned back her phone and she saw she had 22 missed calls from her parents. And they waited until she got home to tell her what happened with Chris, Nancy, and Daniel. And she absolutely lost her mind, and rightfully so. So the next day was Monday Night Raw, and they had a tribute show for Chris Benoit. It was 3 hours, and the arena was empty. We got to see a lot of interviews from many wrestlers just giving their thoughts and prayers for Chris and their family, not truly knowing exactly what happened and what the details were. Now, but prior to that, David Benoit, also, which is Chris's son, that he had with another woman prior to having Daniel marrying Nancy. He found out the police kept calling his mom from an unknown number, and the mother was hesitant to answer. And once she found out it was the police, they went to the police station, and that's when they were notified about the death of their family. And David was so distraught that he ended up punching the police officer, thinking that this must be a horrible joke that they're playing on him. And he soon to realize that this was absolutely true, that everybody was gone. And him being so young, he just could not believe that he lost his family. Now, by Tuesday, more details came out, and it was apparent to the police that this was a murder-suicide situation where it was Chris who had murdered his family before taking his own life, and that happened in the span of about 3 days. And when WWE found out this information, Vince McMahon had soon came out and publicly put out a statement stating that, when they did the tribute show, they did not know exactly what happened. But now that more information has been put out, they wish to no longer comment on the Chris Benoit story, and that they weren't going to be talking about him at all. And by the weekend, Chris Benoit had been completely erased from the WWE. Now, a lot of people don't agree that WWE had erased him as far as him being a wrestler, but I do think that many people feel like it's the right call as a business for them to not acknowledge that Chris Benoit has been part of their company. So now, with the detectives obviously not being there to know what happened, they had to piece together what happened that weekend, and they came down to these details. That on Friday evening, their family had a barbecue. During that barbecue, Nancy and Chris had an altercation where he became violent with her. He ended up restraining her with duct tape and strangling her with a telephone cord. And he wrapped her body in, I believe, what was a rug. And he put a Bible next to her. They also believe that by the next day was when he killed Daniel. They found that he had a lot of Xanax in his system after doing the toxicology report, and then he ended up suffocating him in bed and then placing a Bible next to him. Now, throughout the house, there were empty beer bottles, and there were some empty wine bottles as well, which makes them think that he possibly was intoxicated while he did this. They can't say for sure if he was drinking while doing this or if it was before or whatnot, but that's how they end up finding their bodies. Now, that Saturday evening, he texted a few family members and some wrestlers, including Chavo, who did confirm he did have a message from Chris about how Daniel and Nancy had the stomach virus and that he wouldn't be able to ride with them since he was riding with Chavo and another referee to the pay-per-view, and that he'll make his own way over there. So no one thought much anything of it because he had already told them his story. Now, by Sunday, he had Googled two things. He Googled about a story in the Bible about a son being resurrected, showing that maybe he felt I guess, regret for what he did to Daniel, since Daniel was already had already passed away, and he also Googled how to painlessly break your neck. So he looked for information like that, and then later on. He did commit suicide by hanging himself in his home gym. So they did find a bottle of wine nearby where he was hanging, and they probably think that he probably drank before he ended up doing that. So that was the information that the police had pieced together. And once the media heard the details of this story, they just really, really went crazy with it. Yes, it was a tragedy, but they also found this information, a way to scrutinize professional wrestling. And this became a huge deal with how a lot of people viewed what professional wrestling is and what it can do to certain people once it comes to taking illegal substances like steroids. So, due to the nature of how everyone passed away, Chris Benoit had a private funeral, while Nancy and Daniel had a funeral together, and there was it was a different atmosphere. Now, WWE did send JR over to the funeral, and Nancy's sister let him know that he was absolutely unwanted there. I guess they felt some type of resentment towards WWE, and JR ends up leaving once he realized that no one there actually wanted any type of representation from WWE. And she also states that no one from WWE had since reached out to her family in any type of way, especially like regarding condolences. Now, the only two people that David Benoit says has ever kept in touch with him after that situation was Chavo Guerrero and Chris Jericho. They were the only ones in the wrestling business to reach out to him and help him. And it was really, really tough for him to grieve, especially with the media picking up the story. And as tragic as it was, they really blew up the story to be about not just the tragedy that happened, but to also scrutinize professional wrestling as well. So now all the major news networks were picking up this story, and somehow Chris Benoit's diary was made public. So people were able to see that there was definitely some mental health issues going on, and people did state that that was due to the steroids used and giving him roid rage that would make him be violent with Nancy and also with his family as well. So they did show some text messages between Chris and Nancy where Nancy stated that she was going to leave him because she was tired of him using steroids and becoming aggressive and violent towards her, and she just didn't want to take any more abuse. Now, one other message that really made the media really take this story and run with it was that she texted Chris that WWE wellness program was a joke because she knew that he was taking illegal substances, and for whatever reason, he was still passing WWE's wellness policy. For whatever reason, I'm not sure. Now, Chris Benoit does state that in his diary that he was not, in his right mind, and he wasn't feeling well because especially what happened to Eddie Guerrero. And with what happened with Eddie, that made WWE really make their wellness policy really, really strict so that it can avoid other wrestlers, coming into their death that same type of way. And for some reason, Chris Benoit just happened to pass these, wellness exams when really he was still taking steroids, and they found a large amount of testosterone in his body when they got the toxicology report. And, that showed that there was some steroid use. And before they got the toxicology report, Vince McMahon publicly went out on the news and said, you know what, until we get these reports, you guys can't say that it's steroids, because if they said that it's steroids that was in his system, then they can easily blame, or put some blame onto WWE, knowing that one of their wrestlers were definitely under the influence while working with them, while they're supposed to have a strict wellness policy. So 6 months before Chris Benoit's death, there was a wrestler named Chris Harbor. Not sure if anyone remember him, but he was on Tough Enough, and he ended up later working with WWE for about a year before retiring after having a series of concussions. Now, before he retired from having concussions, he was researching CTE. He was previously a football player, and there were some known case about CTE, but it was not widely known what CTE was. Now, CTE is a condition where the brain degenerates, and you have a series of symptoms where you're not able to function the way you should after having a series of head trauma. So, with professional wrestling, we do have lots of chair shots, and also Chris Benoit was known for doing a flying headbutt. So he was actually interested and finding out more information. Now, 6 months before Chris Benoit had passed away, he did reach out to Chris about CTE. He wanted to know more about it and what it causes. Now, Chris, he doesn't really know as much information as he needs to know about CTE. And Chris Benoit tells him, hey, here's my phone number. Call me sometime so we can talk a little bit more about it. Now, Chris Harbor, he thinks that, Chris Benoit thought that this is something that he might have had, and he wanted to talk to somebody who knew about it. And unfortunately, when he did reach out to Chris Benoit to talk more about it, he was actually having a fight with Nancy over the phone, and they couldn't talk. And shortly after is when he did pass away. Now, once the whole situation came out about what happened with Chris Benoit, and everybody kept talking about it with steroids, Chris Harbor, who was now a neuroscientist, he decided that he wanted to dive deep into more what was going on. So what he did was he reached out to Chris Benoit's father and asked him if they can study his brain. He thought he would say no, but he actually agreed and wanted to know if this was something that could have possibly caused for Chris to act out the way that he did in his final moments. Now, they did test his brain, and within a month, they had the results, and it showed positive for CTE, and there was severe degeneration of his brain that would have caused for him to have emotional instability and for him to have an aggressive nature. So now that we had that physical proof by them looking at his brain and getting those information, they had a press conference to show people that this possibly is the reason why Chris Benoit did what he did. And it coincides with what a lot of people say. Like, his friends and family said they don't believe that Chris would do something like this. Yes, he physically did it, but something that is not like Chris made him do those types of acts. And they definitely say that now that they know that it's CTE that he had, that they would definitely pin it on that diagnosis that he never knew that he had for, going through what he was going through, especially after Eddie Guerrero died, where that's when things really plateaued with his behavior and why he ended up going as far as to killing his family and then killing himself. So now here we are many years later, and people still talk about the Chris Benoit tragedy. Now, for me, I do believe that when it comes to this story, we don't hear enough about what happened to Nancy and Daniel. They definitely did not deserve to go through what they went through. But people who knew and cared for Chris Benoit, and even his fans, would say that, this is not something that Chris would have done, and it's definitely CTE that made him do these types of things. Now, I do think that in the end of the day, whether if he was one of the best wrestlers that ever lived, which I do agree with, I think at the end of the day, WWE does have their say so with when it comes to who they can put into the Hall of Fame, and there's just no way that they can induct Chris Benoit simply for what he did in the ring without talking about his life. And not only that, they would get a lot of scrutiny for inducting Chris Benoit. This would be really bad publicity for them that I don't think that they would want. Now, I do believe Nancy should be inducted, but unfortunately, with the stigma that's attached to her name about how she passed away and what Chris Benoit did, that would also be difficult for WWE to induct her for her contributions into professional wrestling. Now, what I really liked about this episode was that at the end, we got a chance to see David with his aunt, whom he had not seen for 13 years. And also, we got to see him being embraced by Chris Jericho and Chavo Guerrero and also Dean Malenko. And that really showed me that even though this tragedy happened, people still care about him and still want to support him. And it was really nice to see all this happen. And it's absolutely insane how much David looks just like his dad, like literally like a copy and paste type of situation. He looks just like him. And, you know, I know it's tough for some people to listen to him still say that he feels like his dad is a hero to him. But it's not because of obviously what he did at the end of his life, but how he treated him throughout his life up until that moment. So I think it's fair for him to say that, but it's not fair for people to think that he's supposed to hate his dad for whatever he did. If he decided in his heart to forgive his father for what happened, I don't think anybody should be able to say otherwise on how he should feel about his dad. This is one of actually the toughest episodes to sit through, to see how someone so influential in the wrestling industry had, you know, went from being a success story to being, you know, the way how things ended off or whatnot. But, you know, I do hope that going on from here, that when it comes to wrestling promotions, that they keep in mind about what happened to Chris Benoit, about how he had CTE, because there's a lot of wrestlers right now who's been in the game for so long that might have some type of form of CTE right now and don't even know it, from doing all these crazy things with chairs and all these crazy spots and hurting themselves, hurting their brains, and not knowing how damaged their brains may be at this point. Guys, thanks so much for watching my review. I'll be back with episode 3, The Life and Crimes of New Jack.